Hello, welcome everybody. My name is Dustin Stern and I'm the Director of Programming with Building Roots. For those of you that don't know us, I just want to introduce us, the organization Building Roots. We enable people to create socially cohesive communities. We envision vibrant and resilient neighborhoods. And we work with various community partners as well as community members to revitalize and transform the neighborhoods we work in with input and active participation from local community members. We work localized in Moss Park, do a lot of work there and spread out to other areas in Toronto Centre and further east. During COVID-19, just to touch quickly, we've been working to ensure no one is left behind, ensuring fresh food for vulnerable populations, including those reaching those stuck in isolation, especially that, as well as providing at-home resources for children and families, and also making sure that there's access to vital information for all community members about COVID-19 and that they may otherwise not receive. So just before going any further, I just would like to do a land acknowledgement. We wish to acknowledge this land on which we reside here. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, this meeting space is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. Building Roots is continually learning and working to collaborate in the spirit of reconciliation with the Indigenous peoples of this land. Just want to thanks to everyone involved with putting this on and for attending. I'm going to go right ahead and introduce our moderator without any further ado. We have Irina Stankovic joining us today. And Irina is a longtime Toronto resident of over 20 years, a passionate advocate of civic duties. And in addition, Irina has been an active and elected board member of the Canada Green Building Council, Greater Toronto chapter since 2018, and is an active volunteer and now a board member of Building Roots, supporting the Moss Park community. So over to Irina, please.
Thank you, Dustin. Welcome all to the Toronto Centre by-election candidates online meeting. I would first like to introduce Walid Kalagi Ali, civil rights activist, community mentor and builder, and member of the Regent Park Community Benefits Coalition. Walid will be discussing his work and asking the candidates questions later on in the segment. Next, we have Brian Chang, environmental justice and equity advocate and the NDP Toronto Centre by-election candidate. And finally, we have Annemie Paul, activist, lawyer, leader of the Green Party of Canada and Green Party Toronto Centre by-election candidate. Liberal candidate Marcy Ian and Conservative candidate Benjamin Sharma regret they were unable to attend this meeting. Keith Komar, the Libertarian by-election candidate, did provide us with a statement. Our federal government is broken, and it is time for us to choose a new and better way of governance in which our representatives are both responsible and accountable to the people. And now our two by-election candidates will each have up to 2 minutes to deliver their opening remarks. In order to keep us on schedule, I kindly request our two by-election candidates to keep their responses within the required time limit. We will start the opening remarks with Annemie Paul. Annemie, you have 2 minutes.
Hello. Thank you so much for hosting this event. It's absolutely essential, particularly in such a tight by-election, to have the opportunity to speak to members of the community. And that has become, of course, quite a much more difficult task during the pandemic. So thank you very much for the opportunity. And it's just another example of how incredibly civic-minded people are in Toronto Centre, and how with just a little bit of help from the various levels of government, and in our case, the federal government, there are extraordinary things that people can do for themselves in Toronto Centre. So my name is Annemie Paul, and I am your Green candidate in Toronto Centre. I'm also the new leader of the Green Party of Canada. I made the decision to run in Toronto Centre even before I won the leadership, because I was so outraged, so frustrated to know that a community that has been hit so hard by the pandemic, that was struggling before, and that should be spending its time focusing on its urgent needs, had to be going back to the polls, particularly in an unsafe time. And so I'm running this time for the reasons that I ran the last time. I'm running because this is a community that needs help with affordable housing. It's a community that needs a guaranteed livable income. It's a community that needs a real plan for dismantling systemic racism in policing, and decriminalizing opioids, and creating a safe supply. I'm running because it's time for real representation for this community. I'm absolutely convinced, particularly after the speech from the throne, where we had the chance of a lifetime to introduce a guaranteed livable income. And two of the parties that have said they want to support a guaranteed livable income did not seize that opportunity. I'm absolutely convinced that this is the time for new representation for Toronto Centre. And so I'm looking forward to talking with you about that, about hearing what your priorities are, what you expect of me as a representative for your community. And I hope that you know that you will always be my focus if you choose to elect me.
Thank you, Annemie. Next up, we will have the opening remarks, which will be delivered by Brian Chang. Brian?
Hi, everyone. My name is Brian Chang. I am the federal NDP candidate here in Toronto Centre, and it is my honor to be here to talk to you all today. My pronouns are he, him, his, and over the course of the next hour, I really look forward to engaging with everybody about what interests you and what your priorities are. And I want to see those reflected in Ottawa, that I really feel for too long that our voices and our community have been really not served by what's going on in Ottawa and by the Liberals time and time again. We've seen this over and over again. Things like the promise for universal pharmacare, something that was promised to us in 1993, and something that New Democrats have always fought for from the time of Tommy Douglas at the very beginning of universal healthcare here in Canada. For me, there are some really key important policies that we can bring forward. It was New Democrats that fought for enhancements to the Canada Emergency Response Benefit. There was originally supposed to be $1,000. It was New Democrats that fought for it to become $2,000. It was New Democrats that fought for paid sick leave, something that now all Canadians have access to right across the country. It's New Democrats that are fighting for universal basic income that is set at a guaranteed livable income. That is being put forward by NDP MP Leah Gazan. It is New Democrats that are leading the charge for progressive policies, then I think will help everyday people here in Toronto. We've seen ourselves in a time of pandemic that really we're in a transition period in which the choices we make now will determine who will benefit from an economic recovery. The richest people in Canada, the 87 richest families in Canada, have become $37 billion wealthier over the course of the pandemic. Meanwhile, everyday Canadians like you and I are struggling to just put food on the table and to make sure that our families are kept safe. I want to amplify your voices in Ottawa and ensure that you have what you need in order to stabilize yourself in times of crisis and in order to recover better in times of good. So over the course of the next little bit, I look forward to talking with you all and answering questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you both for your opening remarks. We will now proceed with posing several fixed questions from the local Toronto Centre community, starting with a question from Lisa Cates, founding partner of Building Roots. As one of the founding partners of Building Roots, I have seen the challenges in Moss Park firsthand over many years. Moss Park residents have expressed to Building Roots that they feel invisible to the city. Moss Park needs and deserves attention. How are you going to consistently support the organizations working on the ground in this community in a substantial way? Annemie, we will start with you. If you can just kick us off. And again, you will have 2 minutes followed by Brian.
Thank you so much. And it's Annemie, just to, thank you. Just absolutely. And this moment is yet another example of that invisibility. Moss Park is a neighborhood that has been particularly hit hard by the pandemic because it's a neighborhood where people do the kind of jobs that have kept us going and kept society functioning. These are low income jobs. They're also often precarious jobs. They're the jobs in our supermarkets. They're the jobs, driving in ride shares. They're the jobs as aides in hospitals. They're the jobs that, my grandma did her whole life. And then people come home to overcrowded housing because there is no affordable housing strategy, and infection spreads and their families aren't safe. And this is the legacy of decades of neglect. And the final insult then is to have an election in a neighborhood where 7 to 10% of the people have been infected with COVID and telling them it's okay, it can be done safely. And so we just have to say stop. The first step is people caring for their neighbors, saying that even if I don't live in Moss Park, I'm going to care for my neighbors and vote for real representation, knowing that someone who has lived the same experiences as the people in Moss Park, who grew up just like that, is going to be a fighter for you and will never forget you. My office will be open all the time. My phone line will be accessible all the time. The plans that we make are going to be designed by you. These are very simple steps in a representative democracy, and it's just time to reclaim them and bring them home and bring them back to Moss Park.
Wonderful. Thank you, Anami. Apologies about that earlier.
Oh, no, don't worry.
Brian, over to you. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. So the word invisible, I think, is really important, and that stands out for me. And Lisa, thank you so much for your question. I feel like when our political system is not working, people feel invisible, or worse, they feel erased. And that is a violent action, oftentimes by people in power who are choosing to which communities to support and which ones not to. And that isn't something that happens overnight. It's not something that happens in a moment. It is something that happens systemically over an extended period of time. And when Lisa said that it has been decades, it's true. And we're seeing this in pockets all over the riding, but also right across downtown and in other jurisdictions right across Canada as well too. But when we elect people who actually come from the neighborhood and actually understand that, and will show up and talk to people and have an open door and be willing to speak to people from a place of not I know best and I'm going to tell you what is going to work, but really from a place of, I recognize that you're a community. I recognize what you've fought for. I recognize that you are very upset with the system. And I recognize that people feel invisible and erased through this process. And that's going to take a bit of healing. And I think that's a really important part of what a good representative will bring to areas that are dealing with this. We're dealing with people who are in crisis and facing a lot of crisis. And I would bring that idea of healing to those communities. And there is such an important part for community organizations like Building Roots to play in that. There are so many great organizations, grassroots organizations that started from the ground up that have deep connections to people on the ground. And what's really important for me as somebody who's running for member of parliament is to work with organizations like Building Roots to make sure that your voices are heard, that what your needs are, what your gaps are, that I can find the ways in which to find solutions for those, or to bring other people and other groups who are working in those places together so that we can all maybe work together in a similar whole. But this is a long-standing problem and something that will take a long time to fix, but I'm willing to do that hard work and it needs to start now. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. The following 2 questions will come from Larry, starting with, do you support the universal drug plan? If you do support it, how quickly can the federal government produce a plan forward? Brian, 2 minutes, over to you.
Thank you so much. This is such an important policy point for us because it really has to do with equity and raising the ground for everybody. That right now there's such an uneven approach to health in this country, and pharmacare was always supposed to be something that was introduced. Tommy Douglas did not introduce universal healthcare or the idea of universal healthcare with the idea that it would just stop at basic healthcare. There's so much we need to do in terms of expanding our healthcare. Right now, everything seems to stop at your head. The dental care, mental health care, hearing care, eye care, and medication are just forgotten in our current system, and we need to fill those holes. They were never meant to be gaps. And New Democrats will push for that. What we know is that Canadians and small businesses, and this is really important, are paying for the cost of drugs because we don't have a national pharmacare program. What I believe is that if you need medication, that medication should be available to you. If that medication is prescribed by a medical practitioner, you should have access to that medication. It's absolutely heinous that we are the only industrialized nation in the entire world that has universal healthcare without a universal pharmacare program. And that's just wrong to me. And on the ground, that means people who are choosing between being able to put food on their table or choosing insulin. Right? Like there's such a discrepancy. People shouldn't have to make these choices. People are worried about being able to afford the drugs that they have if they're not employed. your medication shouldn't be tied and your healthcare should not be tied to your employment. And for too many people in Canada right now, that's the case. That if they didn't have a job, and we've seen this with the pandemic when people have lost their jobs, if they didn't have the job, they lose their extended benefits, they lose their access to pharmacies and medication. That's unacceptable to me. So New Democrats will step in and help that. It will help small businesses. It will help businesses. It will help everyday people make sure that they have the medication they need. And ultimately, it will reduce our costs in the medical system by ensuring that people are healthier, longer, and have access to what they need. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Brian. Anami, 2 minutes for your response.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. And this is something, rather than focus on the years that we were talking about universal pharmacare and not hearing much from other parties, I want to focus on the good news part of things, which is that we do seem to have a consensus amongst most of the federal parties that universal pharmacare should be brought in. And so absolutely the Greens support it. Brian mentioned many of the reasons that it makes no sense at all that we don't have universal pharmacare in Canada. It's something beyond the fact that we're alone amongst countries with universal Medicare not to have it. It's an enormous cost. We forget how much it costs us not to have these kind of universal programs. In terms of people who become iller than they need to be, who need to spend more time more often in the hospital than they should have to. So we absolutely support it. It was disappointing not to see it in the last parliament. I'm encouraged to see that it was mentioned in the speech from the throne. I'm hoping that before parliament dissolves, because again, a promise is a promise, but it's not a plan. And so I'm hoping that before this parliament breaks up and we have our next election, that we actually introduce the legislation that is going to bring in universal pharmacare.
Thank you, Anami. And now the next question, again from Larry. Justin Trudeau pledged to plant 2 billion trees to combat climate change. He has been pretending he never made the pledge since the last election. Now, do you support Trudeau's idea of planting trees? If you do support it, how many trees do you pledge to support planting? Anami,
yes, thank you. Thank you, Larry. I'm sure it will come as no surprise to you that the Greens support planting trees. And we talked about that not just in the last election and our platform, but even more recently in Reimagining Our Future, talking about the post-COVID recovery. And this is, here are some differences. Planting trees is part of the solution. It is not a solution. It needs to come with what has been glaringly missing and which the Green Party continues to stand alone on, which is having credible targets that respect the science in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions within the time limit that we have. And so planting trees is one part of it. Carbon capture is another, building green infrastructure is another, all the things you need to do to transition towards a climate neutral or a carbon neutral economy. We see a lot of promises recycled over and over again, but we don't see them being implemented. And we need now to make a choice. Are we going to keep electing the same people and hoping that this time it will be different? Or are we going to elect people that we truly believe are committed to following through on their plans and getting us on track to a sustainable, just future?
Thank you, Anami. Brian, over to you.
Thank you. And to echo what Anami has said as well too, we keep seeing broken promises time and time again. Really, it doesn't matter if it's social issues, it doesn't matter if it's the environment, but especially on the environment, we keep seeing broken promises from the Liberals time and time again. So it was originally New Democrats that proposed 1 billion trees to be built, and then just a few days later, Justin Trudeau took that idea on. It's heinous for them to say that we can build pipelines right now, but we can't plant trees. That's kind of what they're talking about right now. And I think that's an unacceptable answer for us. And New Democrats have been very critical of the inaction when it comes to the trees. there are so many different plans that New Democrats have for how do we move towards a zero emission future, and that means investing in zero emission vehicles. It means incredible amounts of building retrofits right across the country to make our buildings much more energy efficient, which is the best return on investment that we could spend money on in terms of reducing our need for heating and energy consumption. We're talking about how do we transition jobs away from extractive resources and really start to think about how do we really build our communities to be more resilient as well too. And key to that as well too, in time of pandemic, if you can't separate the pandemic from the environmental issues that are going on. So when we're talking about what a just transition looks like, what a just recovery looks like, it means things like making sure that we have access to universal pharmacare. And I didn't mention it before, but I'll mention it now. It's really important that we're talking about a COVID-19 vaccine that's available for all people. And right now we haven't got that guarantee from the Liberals. It's something New Democrats have pushed on many times, that we need to make sure that this, as we're moving through this time of transition, that the future ahead includes a COVID-19 vaccine that's available for all Canadians, that makes our communities more resilient and builds us towards that zero emission future. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Brian. Our next question is from Allison from All Saints Church Community Center. What practical steps can be taken between now and the next general election for addressing the opioid crisis? Brian, over to you.
Thank you so much. It's kind of been forgotten in terms of all of the other crises that are going on. And I think our communities are facing a lot of different crises right now. But it means that what was working clearly is not working. What was working in the past was not working. And what is working right now, we need to start revamping and start really, really thinking about. When it comes to the opioid crisis, we're seeing this across the country. It's not just something that's happening in downtown Toronto. The deaths are rampant and they're out of control. The safe consumption sites and the harm reduction framework needs to be expanded, and we need to provide a continuum of care. That we need to recognize that there are people who are using, and that is their lifestyle choice, and we need to support that. There are people who want to recover and no longer want to rely on these drugs. We need to be able to support that. And there's people in between that along the spectrum of care that we need to be meeting their needs of. All Saints is right at the heart of Sherbourne and Dundas and have been doing great work in outreach, and it's been fantastic seeing all of their ability to continue to do that work over the course of the pandemic. But this isn't, again, this is another issue that didn't just start overnight. This is a long-term issue that we're seeing. It's related, the opioid crisis is related to the housing unaffordability. It's related to our inability to provide good paying jobs for people. It's related to our inability to provide community services. It's related to our inability to find good, safe, appropriate shelter care for people. So there are so many different pieces, but what I can guarantee is that I will be there at those community tables, working with the service agencies as member of parliament for this area to make sure that they're coordinating, that they're all working together, and that we're continuing to try new things, because this isn't a crisis that I will turn away from, and it's one that I would look forward to working with our community members on how to best proceed. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Annemie, 2 minutes, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that question. And, you know, this is where you come to the heart of the matter when it comes to the difference between the Green Party and the others. Though we do try to find the commonalities, and there are many, and I'm sure you'll hear Brian and I with very similar solutions to many of the issues facing the community. But we have been very clear for many, many years that we need to decriminalize what are now classed as illicit drugs. We need to create a safe supply. This is the only way to end the deaths, which are not overdoses, they are poisonings. People are being poisoned for lack of a safe supply. And all the other things are essential elements along a spectrum of care. But if we do not begin with a safe supply so that people are not unnecessarily dying because of a lack of such a supply, then we just are, you know, it's just all window dressing. Not one life should be lost in Toronto Centre because someone was poisoned because we did not have that. And so we are unafraid to say that, and we're not going to focus group that. That is just what is needed, and it's needed most acutely in Toronto Centre, because we know a third of calls related to opioid poisonings come from Toronto Centre. So yes, to all of the things that Brian said, absolutely, that's an excellent prescription, and he's absolutely right. But we have got to attack the heart of the problem, and that is through decriminalization and the creation of a safe supply.
Thank you both for your responses. Our next question comes from Sal Sabila, founder of Youth Gravity. What does the post-pandemic world look like for you as an MP? For example, what coverage would those not eligible for COVID-19 emergency benefits receive? And how would you as an MP push the reconciliation agenda further? Annie, 2 minutes, over to you.
I am so sorry. I don't know if it's from my end or not, but there was a lot of breakup and static.
Would you like me to repeat the question?
Yes, please.
So I will just restate again. What does the post-pandemic world look like for you as an MP? For example, what coverage would those not eligible for COVID-19 emergency benefits receive? And how would you as an MP push the reconciliation agenda further?
Thank you very much for the question. And this is one of these things where if you elect someone who comes from a marginalized community and someone who had experience growing up low income, I may be the leader of the Green Party now, but I am surrounded by family and friends who have been left behind by the benefits that exist for this crisis. There are still people, many people across Canada who simply have no protection. They have no assistance of any kind. I'm thinking particularly of students now. I'm thinking of the disabled. There are just many people who are not covered. And so we have got to do better. We have everything that we need to be able to build and create a full comprehensive social safety net that makes sure that every single person has the protection they need. So that is called guaranteed livable income. It is the thing that says wherever you are in the country, whatever your circumstances are, you are going to be able to live in dignity. It's livable. And to have the security to plan for the future without having the emergency of a crisis on your back. The reconciliation thing, I don't know if that's in the context of Indigenous reconciliation or not. It seems like a separate topic altogether. I'll come back to that. It's a very important topic, but only to say that we have the post-pandemic world should be one where we have completed our social safety net. So every person in Canada is covered and protected by that social safety net, and one where we have begun our accelerated path towards a climate neutral economy. Those are the two big ambitions, and we can absolutely achieve both of them.
Thank you, Annemie. Brian, 2 minutes, over to you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to agree with Annemie that the question about reconciliation is one that I would love to engage with, and I'm sure Annemie would as well too, but it is a larger question here. To preface that, I'll say that we believe in New Democrats, and I'm sure Greens also believe in Indigenous sovereignty and working with those communities to make sure they have what they need. Here in Toronto Centre, we have a very large urban Indigenous community, and I want to make sure that they're represented. Right now, the way the federal government negotiates and talks to and interacts with Indigenous people is heavily colonialized, and it is based on imperial assumptions of how the Indian Act works, and it is distinctions based, which means that urban Indigenous people are often forgotten from those negotiations. So there needs to be a new approach to how to do that, so that we can help people here in our cities and across Canada, Indigenous peoples who want to come to the table in a meaningful way but aren't finding themselves accepted due to the way that the federal government currently interacts. On the issue of what a post-pandemic world looks like, I work at SEIU Healthcare, so all of our frontline workers are the people who have been at the front lines of the pandemic in long-term care homes. And the way that the federal government had rolled out this hodgepodge of benefits and programs and sickness leave and EI is so confusing for people that so many people who are even qualified haven't done it. People who are suffering out there, people who are putting themselves through work, who have been infected at work, have struggled to find the protection that they needed for income stability through this time of pandemic. What a post-pandemic future looks like is one in which you don't have to jump through 10 million hoops in order to stabilize yourself, and to know that if you are potentially infected, that you don't have to go to work sick. If you're sick of any kind, that you don't need to go to work sick, that you don't have to worry about missing out on that paycheck and getting further behind. You don't have to worry about missing that mortgage payment. You don't have to worry about missing rent, that there are supports like a universal basic income and other benefits to make sure that people don't fall through the cracks, and that the recovery supports them through ups and downs as we deal with this post-pandemic world. Thank you for the question, and I look forward to engaging on another question of reconciliation if you want to give us the time. Thank you.
Thank you both. And so the question on reconciliation was actually bundled in under one, but I think both of you had sort of covered it as well as you could have, sort of given the context. So thank you both. Now, our next and final set of fixed questions before we move over to Walid. That question comes from Regent Park Community Benefits Coalition. And the question is, homelessness is at a record high in Toronto Centre and is disproportionately impacting Black lives and Indigenous individuals. This is an increasingly serious concern given the approaching winter and danger the cold poses to those that are homeless. Now, how would you support and fund financial programs to incentivize and support residents to access home ownership? Brian, we will start with you. We have 2 minutes on the clock.
Thank you, and I appreciate the work of community benefits. So these are really helpful ways in which we can start to re-envision the way that development works in our communities, and how we can start to make sure that that development isn't happening in isolation of our communities. Because right now I feel like in some cases towers go up and they have nothing to do with our community whatsoever. A lot of that has to do with the way the planning is set up in our particular province and in this particular city. But there is a place for the federal government to play in this, to incentivize and really make sure that we're focusing on the idea of housing. So really, New Democrats have talked about doubling the home ownership tax credit. Other things, making sure that we're building the middle ground of purpose-built rentals, and not-for-profit housing, and making sure, and co-ops, and making sure that people have access to those options as well too. Not everybody's interested in owning a home, nor can everybody, for whatever reason. So we want to make sure that they have an option for housing as well too, that isn't tied to just private home ownership. There are great ways in which community benefits can help support our communities, and we've seen some of that with the development of Regent Park, but we've seen it in other places as well too, right across the Eglinton stretch in particular, with the LRT Crosstown and a lot of the community benefits agreements that have been in place with the Toronto Community Benefits Network. And I was part of some of that work that helped support the development around Casino Woodbine, which is ongoing with the Public Service Alliance of Canada, which I used to work at, and how that's going to continue to help provide work in the Rexdale area for people locally to do job training and to give them good long-term paying jobs. So there are lots of great options in which we can work with developers and other corporations and businesses in those areas, and they also want to come to the table. So it would be helpful to have a federal representative who's willing to also bring people together, and I would be that person absolutely, and willing to do that work with the Benefits Network in Regent Park and with other community partners as well too. Thank you very much for the question.
Thank you, Brian. Anami, 2 minutes over to you.
Yes, thank you for the question. And these are persistent issues for the community of Toronto Centre, and that have been persistently ignored. For me, again, the final straw was the presentation of this national housing strategy by the Liberals, by a Minister of Finance who represented this riding, that did not do anything or offer any solutions, any help whatsoever for the people who had elected him and put him in Ottawa so that he could have that role in the first place. And so, yes, all the things that we talked about in the last election with respect to reinvesting in co-op housing, investing in purpose-built rental housing, investing in micro housing, all of the various the strategies that allow people to have safe, secure, permanent, stable housing. All of those things still apply. None of those things have been properly invested in. And it's important for people when we're talking about any of these issues to keep in mind the place that a guaranteed livable income would play in all of this. Because if you have a guaranteed livable income, it actually means it's livable. And it's not livable unless you can afford to pay for housing, which is a basic part of livability. So we just need the political leadership at this point. The solutions are there. What is missing is the real representation for the community. And that's the last step that needs to be taken.
Thank you both for taking the time to provide your responses to these last 5 questions. Next up, I would like to reintroduce Walid Gogali Ali, member of the Regent Park Community Benefits Coalition, who will have a statement on his end, along with a few follow-up questions. Walid?
Hello. Sorry, there you go. You folks can see me and hear me. Yep, excellent. I just want to first of all start by thanking the organizers for the opportunity to discuss an important movement in Regent Park and surrounding neighborhoods to address the impact of systemic poverty, especially in this era of a pandemic and an economic downturn where local priorities are crucial to be discussed. And I want to actually thank our candidates, Anami Paul and Brian Chang, for supporting and pledging to, when if elected, fund those community priorities. So thank you for the opportunity to have those important conversations about the resident-led initiatives that led to the development of a community priorities report. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off by introducing the community benefits movement, which aims to ensure that the main purpose of economic development is to bring measurable, permanent improvements to the lives of affected residents, particularly those in low-income neighborhoods and communities of color. We as a coalition encourage all stakeholders in the public sector to play a more strategic role in land use planning and urban growth, and to leverage economic development subsidies towards the creation of good jobs, affordable housing, and neighborhood services that improve the quality of life to all residents. So in the priorities report, there's themes that are focused on a pathway to home ownership, which you folks had a question about, but I'm going to focus more on targets, specifically the track record of current government in phase 4, 1 to 3, and what our community has demanded. So some context, we've had over $1 billion invested in Regent Park for the phase 1 to 3 development, and the track record speaks to itself. For example, we've had 35 full-time jobs created. Those are 35 good jobs, and 15 people or 15 families had access to home ownership. Those are abysmal numbers for an investment of over $1 billion, especially when the commitment that was made to our communities that we will have a pathway to home ownership. That's why we had programs and financial incentives that were backed by the federal government, as well as the municipal government and the provincial government being there as a stakeholder as well, in creating programs that we've now found out through coverage by the Toronto Star last week, specifically, I believe Jennifer from the Toronto Star, was that the audit reveals that there hasn't been proper allocation of resources for folks to access home ownership. So now my question will be focused on the youth, and I hope you folks can tie the community benefits in your response to that. So specifically, my question is, youth unemployment is at a record high due to the impact of the pandemic and the economic downturn. Will you support local hiring with hard targets for local employment as outlined in the community priorities report? And just as a reminder, I believe Anami Paul spoke about credible targets, and I believe Brian Chang also spoke about hard targets in their response. So my question to you folks is, would you support those transparent mechanisms such as the community benefits agreements with hard targets to make sure that our investments are intentional in creating those good jobs for our youth and for families living in marginalized and communities impacted by this pandemic.
Brian, we will start with you.
Thank you so much for that question, Waleed. And one thing I hear that you're saying really clearly is that clearly promises were broken in the past. And we saw that there was supposed to be a commitment to 50% affordable housing in Regent Park when it was originally proposed as well too. So I'm not going to make a promise that I'm not going to be able to keep, and I'm not going to put that on the community to have to deal with the after effects. What I do want to see is that the amazingness of somebody who, imagine that youth right now who learns a skilled trade from a labor union and builds actually their home community that turns into their lifetime job of being able to build their home for their community, build their community literally with their own hands, and have those skills that they can use transferably to build other communities and build up across the city. That's exciting to me. And that's the kind of thing that I know that labor partners are looking forward to. And I know something that Toronto Community Benefits is pushing for in other parts of the city as well too. I'm committed to working with the community, and I want to work with you, Willie, and I want to work with the coalition to make sure that whatever number we come up with is one that we bring to the table, and that it is met, it is committed to, and that it is and that there's accountability for that. Because I think what it comes down to is our community wants accountability for whatever is promised to us, and I agree with you that what we saw with previous promises were broken and is abysmal. 35 jobs for $1 billion worth of investment is not, that's not a good return on investment in any way, shape, or form, and is not a meaningful way of including the community in the redevelopment. So thank you so much for the question, and I look forward to working with you in the future.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Brian. Anami, over to you.
Yes, thank you very much for the question. And it's going to be a recurring theme, but it really is one that needs to be repeated, which is, a community can't keep electing the same people and expecting different results. And it's been 27 years of the same party representing this community. So you can have the targets, but if there's no political will behind those targets, then they're just empty words on a piece of paper. And so the first decision is there a different choice that's going to be made? Because the Liberals won with over 50% of the vote in the last election in Toronto Centre, and all of these problems existed a year ago. It's not even a year ago. And so we have to ask, why do people keep voting for these same people that are making these very poor decisions and representing them so badly? So absolutely, in this and all respects, what the community deserves is an advocate, someone who is going to identify every single lever, every single mechanism, instrument, every single program that will benefit the community, and then wake up every day figuring out how to unleash those on behalf of the community. That is what the community needs. That's really what this election is all about. So I say yes, and I say more. I say that I will actually do it and wake up every day thinking about it if I'm elected.
Thank you, Anna Marie.
Thank you to both candidates and Walid for your statement and posing that question. Now, I do understand that we do have some excess minutes remaining. So if the two candidates are open to it, I could always allow an extra minute or two to address the earlier question around reconciliation. So we'll just restate the question once more. And Anami, we can have you kick us off with that. So the question from Sal Saliba was, how would you as an MP push the reconciliation agenda further? And again, I'll allow just about a minute to minute and a half. Anami, over to you.
Yes, thank you very much. This is, so So throughout the campaign, and when I give my land acknowledgement, I talk about how much the Black diaspora in Canada has lost itself through colonialism. You know, the people think of Black people as being indigenous to the Caribbean, but we're not. We were brought there as slaves, and the indigenous people were completely wiped out. In this country, it was legal to own Black and indigenous peoples until 1834. And so we continue to suffer the legacy of colonialism, both of our peoples, and we continue to be the two top communities disproportionately represented when you look at all the indicators of systemic racism across the system. And so for me, this is a very personal and deep commitment. I said in my acceptance speech when I won the leadership that I stand at the ready to be an ally and to take instruction. This is the key part, to take instruction from Indigenous peoples in this country about what I need to do to be a strong ally. I support self-determination, I support sovereignty, and I believe that the only way that we are going to have true reconciliation is nation to nation, which is the way that it should have been all along. That is the only way we are going to overcome this history of colonialism.
Thank you, Anami. Brian, over to you. Again, about a minute to minute and a half.
Thank you so much. And I'm really happy that we had a chance to talk some more about this. So I am looking with dismay at what's happening in Nova Scotia right now. The terrorism that the Mi'kmaq are feeling and being subjected to is a direct symptom of the white patriarchy and the white supremacy that continues to pervade so much of the institutions that we have. And I want to thank Anami for sharing those words as well too. One thing that brings me hope for this particular by-election is the fact that there are so many the major parties have put forward racialized candidates here in this particular riding. And then we all share, well, with the exception of the Conservative candidate, Anami, Marcy, and myself all share West Indian heritage. My family is from Jamaica. So it is fantastic and a good moment for West Indians as well too. What it comes down to in terms of reconciliation is that we need to have the political will to stand up against these things and to call it what it is, that it is, whether it's Islamophobia, whether it's homophobia, whether it's transphobia, whether it's anti-Indigenous sentiment. We need to call these things out and start to work towards an anti-racist framework. This means supporting Indigenous peoples in a meaningful way. It means making sure that we're meeting what their needs are, just like Anami said, not telling them what they need, but actually listening to them and amplifying their voices. And then what it comes down to is also making sure that we're constantly working towards justice. And for us here in Toronto Centre, that also means emancipation for our LGBTQ2S+ communities, making sure that refugees coming to this country have access to documentation and status, and making sure that we continue to make an inclusive Canada that constantly fights back against white supremacy and institutions of colonialism. So thank you so much for allowing us to come back to this question.
And thank you both for addressing what is clear to be a very pressing issue for the Toronto Centre community. Now, finally, we will move over to the closing statements from our two by-election candidates. And so we'll just like to remind you both again that you will be given 2 minutes to sort of allocate to closing statements. And Ryan Chang, we will start with you.
Thank you. And I'll go back to Sal's question. And Sal, the fact that you're thinking about these things as somebody who lives in Toronto Centre, about how do we build, how do we as racialized people build capacity and anti-racism with other partners across the country in different places. I think that's so important because it's so true that none of this happens in isolation, that the structures that we're seeing and the structures that we're fighting against are all interrelated. And your other part of your question, which was, what does a post-pandemic future look like? And that's what makes me really excited to think about. What does it look like in which my friends with MS don't have to worry about losing their job and losing their access to their medication? What does it look like for someone like me who's LGBTQ2S+ identified, and when I don't have to pay out of pocket for things like Gardasil, and when friends who want to have access to PrEP have access to that without having to pay $1,500 a month to just keep themselves safe from HIV? And what does it mean when our communities are resilient and have access to things like paid sick leave, so they don't need to go to sick work, and that we're not seeing outbreaks in places like Loblaws because people are making minimum wage and struggling and unable to take time off? the future could be out there, and it's about how do we make sure that there are those supports for them, so that when we're going through this time of ups and downs and struggles and whatnot, that there is some stability that we can rely on, that that like if you lose your job, there is something there to support you, and it's going to be this benefit, and making sure that those benefits are amounts that people can live on. The fact that disabled people in Canada have gotten a $200 and nothing else this entire pandemic is absolutely heinous, and it is so wrong. And it really needs to be focused on people, so that the economic recovery that we're seeing is something that helps everyday Canadians, not the wealthiest. We've seen the wealthy continue to make money over the course of this pandemic, and that's unacceptable. So the future for me is one in which everyday people have the supports they need, the floor raises for everybody, and we have the stability that we need to deal with the pandemic and times of crisis and come back stronger after. Thank you so much for all of the time, and I've really enjoyed chatting with everyone, and thank you for Anime for being here as well too.
Thank you, Brian. Anime, 2 minutes over to you.
Thank you so much. And again, thank you so much for the invitation and the opportunity. These are few and far between, unfortunately, given the pandemic. And so they're really, really, really valued and appreciated. And I do want to thank Brian very much for coming. This is the second time we've participated in a talk with the community. And, this is how real representation starts. It doesn't start after you're elected, it starts now. And I can't think of any justifiable reason that other candidates seeking to represent this community can explain why they are not here today for this important event. That leads into my reflections for this community. And I'm speaking directly to all of you who are watching from Regent Park and Moss Park and St. Jamestown, and all of the pockets of our community that have just been left behind, forgotten, and neglected. You have got to say enough. You've got to say enough. I know my family is an immigrant family, and my family voted Liberal my entire life. I understand they brought us here, but they brought us here and then they're not taking care of us. So you've got to say enough. We're going to make another choice this time. We're going to make a choice that benefits our community, that gives us the representation we deserve. You will have that in me. You will have a national leader who is there thinking about you first, despite being a national leader, and who promises to bring finally to this community the representation that it deserves, the social programs it deserves, things like a guaranteed livable income and all of the other things that we've talked about, because it is possible. If you extend yourself and have the courage of doing that thing you haven't done before, you're going to find that there are tremendous benefits waiting for you on the other side. And that is a commitment from someone who was born in this community and who will never let this community down if I have the honor of representing it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much to everybody. Just want to say on behalf of Building Roots, I just want to thank again for everyone for being involved. If you weren't here at the beginning, my name is Dustin Stern. I'm the Director of Programming with Building Roots. We'd love to stay connected with everybody. You can do so through our website. I invite anyone to email me directly as well to dustin@buildingroots.ca. So I want to thank the moderator, Irina Stankovic, the Building Roots team behind the scenes, such as Bailey, Hannah, and Cheyenne for putting this on. I want to thank someone totally behind the scenes, Ray Nakano, who helped us put this on front to back. So he's a climate activist who has put on a lot of forums and helped engage a lot of Canadians about climate change and the environment. I want to thank Waleed Kogali Ali for being here and contributing to the conversation. And of course, the candidates, and Anime Paul and Brian Chang for being here today, as well as Marcy Ian for coming in on Saturday in lieu of being able to make it today and chatting with me, and as well as Brian Chang for making a visit. It was a beautiful day there. We had our first ever tent encampment action day, supporting directly the tent encampments in Moss Park, in addition to the rest of the community that we serve. And it was great having multiple Toronto Centre candidates for the by-election being there as well. So thanks again to everyone for being here. We look forward to working more together with you and our broader communities here in the Toronto Centre riding. Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks so much. Bye.